What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and I have a fantastic interview lined up for today. Great guest. But before I get to the guest, I want to make an announcement because the P.A.S. report is expanding, and I'm able to expand because of you, the audience. You come to this podcast, you listen, you share it with your family and friends and on social media. And because of the growth that we've seen, I've decided that I'm going to start putting out videos as well. Now, there'll be some hiccups along the way. I'm not one of those tech gurus, so all this is new to me. But the videos will take a different format than the actual audio podcast. The interviews will be the same, but as far as the podcast goes, I'll release the full episodes, and then there'll be shorter videos that go along with it. So I encourage you all to keep tuning in. Make sure to visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. I'll have more information there. I'll have links to Rumble. I'll have links to YouTube so that you can subscribe to the channels, give the videos a like. And again, I want to thank you all for your continued support because that's what has allowed this podcast to become successful. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And now I want to get to today's guest, who is none other than Kari Lake. And now I want to welcome Kari Lake to the PAS Report. Kari is the author of Unafraid, Just Getting Started, and she is just getting started. I mean, she's made waves throughout the political community, and it's actually a refreshing voice in today's political climate because everything's upside down. So, Kari, welcome to the PAS Report. How are you?
Good to be here, Nick. Thank you. I'm so excited about my book. I don't know if you've ever written a book or anybody out there listening has, but when you're, starting to write it and you start typing things out and you think, is it ever going to end up in book form? And so to hold this in my hand feels really good.
Yeah, I'm still working on my first, and it's amazing how long it actually takes, especially with my two little ones that always disrupt me and the work at the college. But I find it fascinating because you went from a career in journalism to a political candidate in Arizona. And what was the thing that surprised you the most when you made that transition? When you decided that you were going to run for political office, what surprised you?
Well, I think for starters, I never imagined leaving my dream career. And then because of COVID and the 2020 election, it just was feeling like I couldn't put the truth out. And if I couldn't be honest with the people of Arizona who'd been so gracious to welcome me into their homes for, 27 years, I didn't want to do the job. And the amazing thing is that the people then reached out to me and said, would you please, if you're not going to do that anymore, we want you to run for office. So I was recruited to run for office. I think one of the things that surprised me is how well suited I was for politics based on my career. Journalism is actually a very good starting point and background for politics, especially at the level I was doing it, where I had covered Arizona for 27 years. So I fully understood all the issues facing our wonderful state. Being a broadcast journalist and a news anchor allowed me to have a relationship with the people that the voters, basically the people of this great state. So when I would walk into a room, a campaign stop, I didn't have to say, hey, my name is Kari Lake and I'm running for office and I'd like you to get to know me a little bit. They already knew me. I had this beautiful advantage because of that, and a name recognition, name ID, but beyond name ID, a relationship with the people of this state. I was surprised at just how slimy and dirty politics is. And I think the thing that surprised me most, I didn't know this going in, is how fractured we are in the Republican Party. Sadly, it was the people in the Republican Party. It was people with an R behind their name that ran this sabotaged, corrupt election. The Democrats did their usual. We know some of the games they play when it comes to elections, but I was really horrified to find out that the men who were running our elections in Maricopa County were so corrupt. The ones who botched the election had an R behind their name. And I was also surprised to find out that they had started a super PAC to raise money to try to defeat me. That I will say that's hurtful. The politics is no place for feelings, but it was hurtful and infuriating, to be honest. I think they should be above the fray when you're running the elections. You should be above the fray and not get involved that way. So a lot of things surprised me. Those might have been the things that surprised me both on the positive side and the negative side.
Yeah, Republicans do a really good job at screwing themselves in elections. And we see it all the time here in New York because you'll have Republican Party, the party bosses that care more about their positions than actually pushing forward a conservative agenda and actually
Yeah,
winning elections.
that's
So
right.
it
Because they
really
want
is
because they want
unfortunate.
to be politicians. We need people who don't want to be politicians. I don't want to be a politician. As a matter of fact, when people call me a politician, I kind of cringe. I go, I'm not, I'm really not. I'm just a mom who got fed up and realized I can't stay on the sidelines, that our founding fathers, when they built this beautiful country and brought us the freedoms that they brought us, with the help of God, that it's our duty as Americans to get involved.
And that leads me to my next question because you were well off. I mean, you were fine. You had a great career. You were well liked. You didn't need to go into politics. You didn't need to run for office. You could have enjoyed more of your career, but you decided to sacrifice everything, put everything on the back burner because you saw something. Even after you saw what they did to former President Trump, even after you saw how they savaged and attacked him and ridiculed him. So what gave you that motivation? I mean, I understand that it was you saw what's happening in the country, but what specifically frightens you the most?
Well, my book title is Unafraid, and I really do feel unafraid. I think the fear for me, when you walk through your fears, you come out on the other side, and nothing can intimidate you or make you afraid. And my fear was walking away from my career. I'm going to be honest, I'm a human being. I didn't want to really walk away from the money. I was making a huge paycheck. I walked away from a 7-figure contract. And so that was difficult. I prayed very much to God that I was making the right decision and I wouldn't regret it. And some of the fears on the campaign trail, when your opponents are coming at you and throwing lies out, that is not fun. I figured that when I got into this, though, that because I'm here in Arizona, which is a conservative state, by the way, unfortunately, they're rigging elections and trying to tell people, gaslight people into thinking we're a purple state or even a blue state. We're not. I figured that the media, having been in it for 30 years, they wouldn't be as harsh with me as they were with Trump. But now what I realize is that any outsider who is not part of their system, is not able to be bribed or blackmailed or controlled, is an arch enemy and an existential threat to them. And they will do anything to stop them. And they did this with Trump. 8 years of a slander campaign, of a defamation campaign, throwing out absolute lies. I used to believe that every news article had just a sliver of truth at least. And now I know I've had so many stories written on me where I read the whole thing and I go, there's not one truthful fact. There's not one truthful statement in that whole article. And they're doing it to me right now. They're so worried about me ending up on the ticket again. As a matter of fact, I talked about it. I didn't put this in the book, but I had a very powerful political person come to my door and try to bribe me into sitting out and not getting it back in politics for 2 years. I think they're so worried about having me on the ballot and Trump and populist candidates who are going to work for we the people, that they're in a panic because they just can't get Trump back in the White House or it's game over for them. And I think they feel the same way about me. That's why they had to rig our election.
And looking at it, I mean, you have the press that savaged you, and we saw this, right? I mean, even former President Trump, Democrats loved him prior to 2015. They always went to him for money. They wanted his campaign money, and they used to bow to him, invite him to all the parties. Same thing with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Same thing with yourself. And it does go to show you what's your advice when it comes to the media, because I saw your campaign and I saw how you push back. And that's what most Republicans want to see. They want to see fighters. Unfortunately, a lot of the Republican candidates, they're scared of the press. So what would your advice be to anyone that has to deal and take on the press, given your background?
Always come equipped with a microphone and a camera. You have to be recording them. And I talk about, I talk about leaving my career, what it was like to come into journalism when I did back in the early 90s. And then I talk about inside the fake news and turning the script on the enemy of the people. These are some of the chapters in my book, how I decided I'm going to record what these propagandist journalists are saying to me, because what they do is they throw a question at you that is just loaded with lies and nonsense, and then they get your response to it. They put your response out, and unfortunately, they don't put their loaded question in there. So we started just releasing the interviews before they could even get them on the air, and really turning it on them on the media. And by the end of my campaign, I noticed that we had kind of retrained the media on how to be journalists. Their questions became more substantive, less biased and loaded. And we really exposed what they're up to. And I'm really proud of the fact that we did that. You did ask me a question just a bit ago, and I don't think I fully answered. You said, what are you worried about? What are you afraid of? I was saying I'm unafraid. I'm unafraid of this fight, because I believe with every fiber in my being that God planted us here, placed us here at this very moment for a reason, just as he placed our founding fathers, 247 years ago here for a reason. And this is the generation that will save our country. I really believe that. So when you lean on that, you're not afraid. But what does keep me up at night is, losing our country, if we're unable to win this. And that's why I implore people to get involved, stay involved. And that's why I go around the country talking about the importance of honest elections and why we need to reform our elections. I don't want the Republicans to have an advantage. That's not what I'm looking for in reforming our elections. But I certainly don't want the Democrats or anybody to have an advantage. It should be a level playing field where the most liberal Democrat, the most conservative Republican can go into a voting booth and know that they cast their one legal vote. That legal vote counts for one legal vote. It's not watered down. It's not manipulated. The machines aren't manipulated. The ballots aren't misprinted intentionally. We've got to reform our elections or we lose our country. So I'm on a mission, and they're trying to stop me, and the most crazy, outrageous lies and news stories that they're putting out about me. And I've been hit with a bunch of them lately. It just tells me they're incredibly worried about me staying in the game, just the same as they're worried about Trump staying in. That's why they're indicting him and all of that. So we got to stick together as Americans and pull through and save this country.
And I do have to ask you, I mean, prior to getting into the race, and then once you got into the race and the election happened, are you surprised at how our elections are not transparent at all, and how it's extremely difficult to get any type of real information? And even when there's subpoenas out there, even when you request information, they continually try and give you the runaround?
I am a little bit surprised by that. I mean, I shouldn't be. They want us to believe they're running these secure elections. These are the most secure elections ever, but you can't look at them, but don't ask any questions, but don't mention it. But they're the most secure elections ever. You just can't ask questions about it. You can't look under the hood. We need an election system that we can audit all the time. It should be always audited. We want to make sure that it's fair and honest. And we've had to sue for public records in our case, and had I not stuck with it, initially, had I not filed my election lawsuit, like there were actually Republicans who told me, don't file a lawsuit, just move on and run again. I said, are you kidding? We got to fix this problem. We have to fix this problem for our country. And so we only had 5 hours to prove our case. It's a very truncated system when you're filing an election lawsuit. It's very difficult. We had 5 hours to prove our case. The county would not give us the information that we needed, the public records. We've had to sue along the way. And then we did our appeal, and we had to sue again. And they would reluctantly drag their feet, give us information on the eve of our trial starting up, but we couldn't even hardly get through the information. But as we have dug through the evidence and the data that we finally have been given, we're even more shocked by how rigged this election was. No wonder they didn't want to give us the information, because they're running corrupt, rigged elections, and we're going to expose it all. We are taking it to the appeals court again. I would love to get it to the United States Supreme Court. If your listeners care about election integrity, I believe that my case here in Arizona is the case that is going to crack this whole rotten system open and begin the process of securing our elections. And they don't want us to go forward. They're trying to fight us. I'm being sued by the people running our elections now because I'm talking about them. They're suing me for defamation, for speaking out and revealing what's wrong with our elections. And that's why we started Save Arizona Fund, for Americans who want to see our case go forward, because it is so critical to get involved and take some ownership in our case. I really believe this is the case that makes it to the U.S. Supreme Court, that saves the day when it comes to our elections.
And the narrative they're putting out there is actually frightening. I mean, you have the Biden administration that releases the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, where it basically states that anyone that questions elections is expressing anti-government, anti-authority sentiment, and you're not allowed to ask questions or else you may be a domestic terrorist. So it really is concerning the way they frame it. But at the same time, do you think on a national level, the Republicans failed to recognize all the different voting mechanisms that the Democrats were putting in place during COVID, and Republicans should have utilized those same tactics? And I know you just said this shouldn't be about giving Republicans a leg up in elections, and that's so true. But at the same time, I think Republicans, they missed out. They didn't realize how deep this really goes.
I like to think that we're honest and we don't want to be criminals, but there are many Republicans, as I said, who were involved in this corrupt election system. And, we got a situation where you can get 3 or 4 or 5 mega counties, and Maricopa County is a mega, M-E-G-A. It's also MAGA, by the way, M-A-G-A. It's a mega county. And when you can rig mega counties around the country, you can take the whole election with you. So even if you're in a state where they actually have elections that are run a little more fairly and honestly, you've got these counties around the country where they're rigging and botching elections intentionally. And it doesn't matter how good your state is or your county is running elections, because these big, huge counties can take the whole election, as we saw in 2020. So nothing surprises me right now. We're in unprecedented times. It calls for unprecedented measures. And I think that the rigged system that we're operating in, if it still exists this way in 24, we got to get in there and roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty. I hope it doesn't exist in 24. I hope we have some reform by 24. And that's why I'm fighting so hard right now.
And we certainly need to, because we have a lot of issues that are pressing the United States, pushing us to the brink. If you had to pick, what do you think is the most dangerous issue that the United States is facing today?
Oh my gosh, where do we begin?
I know there's so many, and with this administration, it's like
I lay awake at night with thinking of how we're being invaded with this open border. Fastest way to take over a country is through an invasion, right? Now you think of the invasion would be like, ships coming to the shore and people coming off and taking over, our enemy doing that. We're having this happen at our southern border. Millions of people are pouring in. The numbers that the government's giving us are way low. I think it's much higher. I think upwards of 18 million could have come in since Joe Biden took office. We don't know, because we're getting such dishonesty from him. My fear is that border will continue to be open, and we're having people who don't love America come through, sadly. And we're cheapening our citizenship. We're cheapening what it means to be in America by allowing this. That's at the lowest level. It's almost like that doesn't really matter, because we have people who are terrorists and criminals coming into our country. And that keeps me awake at night. The fentanyl pouring in, trying to poison a young generation, that keeps me awake at night. The World War III that is being provoked to start by, frankly, Joe Biden and his administration and many others around the world, that keeps me awake at night. But again, the lack of law and order on our streets, the indoctrination of our children, this absolute horrible, push for changing the gender of our precious babies. This all keeps me awake at night. But it all comes right back down to, how do we solve these problems? We solve them by getting in to office people who want to put America first. And if we can't get people into office that we the people are voting for, because our election system is so corrupt, then we are done as a country. So that's why the number one issue for me is reforming our elections.
And I think you said something that is actually probably the most important thing that I never hear anyone say. So I'm glad you said it. And that's the idea of devaluing citizenship. What's the point of citizenship if you can come illegally and you can get all these benefits? So I really think Republicans need to start
They
focusing on
don't
that.
want America to survive. They don't want they don't want it to be meaningful to be American. They want a globalist agenda. This is part of their globalist push to completely transform the world and make us a globalist blob. We're just a blob of people that are serfs to a handful of globalist leaders. And we're facing an existential threat. It's communism, globalism versus Americanism. It's not Democrat versus Republican anymore. They want us to think that, but it is the uniparty swamp, globalist, Marxist folks. They'll never admit that that's what they are, but that's what it is, versus Americanism, what our founding fathers put forth, where we are individuals with freedoms and liberties. And so that's the fight we're at right now. Do we save America? When you're pumping millions of people across that border, they're counting on the definition of being an American meaning nothing. And for me, it means everything. And this is a hill that we cannot surrender. And so I'm, as a mother, in there fighting, and there's millions of other moms just like me out there, and dads who are fighting back right now. And when you awaken that sleeping giant, the moms and dads of the world, you're going to have hell to pay when you try to cross us.
And we should never surrender our sovereignty to any intergovernmental organization. I mean, the reality is this is America, and we should be doing what's in America's interest. So
That's
what
right.
should the Republicans be doing for 2024? What should they be doing?
Well,
what issues?
First of all, acknowledging that we have a problem with our elections. There are people running right now against President Trump who are saying that there's no problem with our elections. That is the biggest line of BS I've ever heard. They know they're wrong, but they are catering to that globalist side of the Republican Party, the hardcore globalist establishment, swampy side. And so we've got to start by acknowledging there's a problem. And frankly, and this is my word, not to the Republican leaders, to the American people, do not give your vote to any Republican or Democrat or whoever if they can't acknowledge that our elections are a mess, because the majority of Americans now believe that our elections are filled with fraud. If you look at the polling data, 80% of Republicans say our elections are fraught with fraud, 61% of independents, and more than 30% rather of Democrats even acknowledge we've got serious fraud. So I think acknowledging the problem is always the first way to fix the problem and reform our elections. And that's what we have to do. And we're not seeing that right now. We've got some people who are on the ground working hard to reform elections, but not all. So Republicans need to get with the program here, and let's try to reform our elections. And I don't think you should donate to any Republican group or entity, whether it be your state GOP, whether it be national, if they are not acknowledging that we have to reform our elections.
And piggybacking off that, because that's one aspect, what about the bureaucracy? And what I mean by that is you have these federal institutions that have gotten involved in the 2016 election, they've gotten involved in the 2020 election, and now they're interfering in the 2024 election. What do you think, especially when we look at Congress? I mean, what do you think Republicans should be doing? I mean, this is insane that you would have members of the most powerful intelligence and law enforcement communities interfering in American elections.
It's horrifying. I mean, when they're not rigging the elections down on the ground level, they're interfering. They're trying to, indict Trump to keep him off the ballot. They're doing the same with me. They're suing me. They're trying to get us so bogged down that we can't run because they're so afraid of us running again, exposing their criminality when it comes to elections. So, I mean, what should what Congress should be doing is what they're doing right now. I'm impressed with what House of Representatives is doing. They control the purse strings, and they need to, in my opinion, stop funding all of these outlets that are interfering in our election. They need to stop funding some of these election, like CISA and all of those. Don't give them money. Just as I said with Ukraine. The war over there stops when we stop funding it. We've got to stop funding some of these three-letter agencies, pull back funding, and start investigating. And I think they're doing that right now. I wish it would go faster, but we know how things go in DC. It's like
and Democrats control the Senate, so you're limited in what you could do.
But the appropriations comes out of the House.
Yep.
And so they can actually do a lot by just turning off the spigot of money that's going to some of these. And they don't need the Senate to approve it. They can just stop the funding.
Absolutely. And since you are unafraid, what's next for Kari Lake?
Well, I am seriously looking at a run for U.S. Senate, and I want the people out there to know that doesn't mean I'm giving up on election reform. My case will move forward. We've got attorneys working with us who are devoted to this. By the way, they're trying to disbar my attorneys. I mean, they're so worried about our case that they're suing me. They're trying to disbar my attorneys. They're trying to make it impossible for us to push this case forward. That tells you how important our election case is. And that's why I am 100% devoted to fighting it and taking it all the way through. And but in the meantime, we have an opportunity to pick up a U.S. Senate seat with somebody who's really going to put the people of Arizona first when they're back in D.C. instead of what we have now, which is a person who just votes with Biden 95% of the time, only comes home, for a few months every 6 years to try to act like she cares about the people and cares about our issues when she really is just a creature of DC. So I'm considering that run, and I'll be making a decision here in the coming months.
That's great. And everyone needs to check out Unafraid, Just Getting Started, because I do believe that you are just getting started. Kari, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to have links up at the website to the book, Kari Lake, Unafraid, Just Getting Started.
It's a page turner, I promise.
And I'm sure the audience is looking forward to it. We're going to have also links up to your Twitter feeds and all that, so everyone can follow you.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. It was great to chat with you today.
Many thanks to Kari Lake for coming on and speaking with the P.A.S. Report audience. I really enjoyed the conversation. As I said, I'll have all the links up at the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, so check it out. As I said in the beginning of this episode, make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast, and you can do it on any podcast platform that allows it. Take 30 seconds, write a review. As far as Rumble and YouTube goes, leave a comment. That always helps when it comes to keep continuing to grow the audience. I really want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.